confronts the unimaginable. A shocked country unites in grief.
While investigators fan out all across the United States, tracking down those responsible for an unprecedented day of terror.
Hello and welcome to CNN's continuing coverage of America under attack. I'm Colleen McEdwards at CNN Center.
And I'm Jim Clancy. We're going to begin at Ground Zero, right there in New York City, where bright searchlights illuminate the darkened ruins of the World Trade Center. The search and rescue effort goes on into its second night as workers are painstakingly combing through a mountain of wreckage, trying to find survivors, trying to recover bodies. Authorities say thousands are feared dead in the attack that destroyed the Twin Towers. So far, only 9 survivors have been pulled from the wreckage. A short time ago, authorities evacuated 2 other popular landmarks in the city. Police say they cleared out the Empire State Building after a bomb-sniffing dog detected something suspicious. No bomb was found. Police barriers were removed a short while later. That scare also prompted authorities to clear out nearby Penn Station.
And in Washington, the U.S. Commander-in-Chief got a first-hand look at a wounded symbol of American military might. President Bush visited the Pentagon a day after a hijacked jet left a burned-out gash in the building. Hard hat workers unfurled a giant American flag off the side of the building and sang a chorus of God Bless America. That flag still hanging out there at this hour. The U.S. military says about 150 people, mostly Army personnel, are unaccounted for. 64 people were aboard the plane that slammed into the building. Mr. Bush says that he was overwhelmed by the devastation at the Pentagon.
Coming here makes me sad on the one hand. It also makes me angry. And our country will, however, not be cowed by terrorists, by people who don't share the same values we share, by people who are willing to destroy people's lives.
The smoke still hangs over the skyline of New York, a battered skyline. And gingerly, rescuers are trying to search a mountain of rubble, search for survivors among all of the devastation. Unfortunately, they are finding few. Garrick Utley joins us now live from New York with more on the grim aftermath. Garrick?
Jim, before we go to Lower Manhattan and get the latest update on that rescue effort that's underway there, we need to really address something that happened a few hours ago here in central, more uptown Manhattan. On 34th Street, which is right here, because the CNN newsroom in New York City is located on 34th Street and 8th Avenue. And we looked out the window, and suddenly this great crosstown boulevard avenue was empty, and there were police sirens and red lights flashing, fire department trucks coming. What was going on? Well, what we saw, and we saw on videotape too, were the scenes of an evacuation there on 34th Street. What was happening was a bomb scare. There are the police there clearing traffic, telling people get out of the way. There came the fire engines. Reports had come in that there was a bomb in the Empire State Building, on the corner of 5th Avenue and 34th Street, and in Penn Station, very close by, one of the main transit points in New York City. Well, the search went on for about an hour, and the all-clear was finally given. But it raised, of course, a very important question. This was the first of the false alarms, or bomb hoaxes, if you will, that was called into police here. It forced many police to come in and divert their energies from what's going on downtown and other very serious security obligations. And we can only expect that perhaps there will be more of these incidents in the future. That's part of the time we're living in right now. And you stop and think that this, in a way, can be a part of terrorism. You don't have to have a bomb. You don't even have to be in New York to phone in this kind of a bomb scare. You can be in Afghanistan. You can be in the Middle East, any part of the world. Get on the phone, call the 911 number, and cause a lot of trouble. That's happened before. It may happen again, but that's part of life as of this evening here in Midtown Manhattan. Let's go downtown now to Alessio Vinci, our correspondent, who is really on the scene, has been walking around there as the rescue efforts continue. Alessio, what have you been able to find this evening?
Well, Garrick, it's been almost 40 hours since the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center collapsed after being hit by the 2 hijacked passenger jets. And as you can see behind me, a thick black and white cloud still billowing on top of that wreckage, an indication that still on the ground there, still smoldering the iron and the dust, everything is real very much still very dangerous for the rescue workers there. On the ground, hundreds of them, police officers, paramedics, and rescue workers all involved in this rescue operation. We spent some time earlier today there, and we saw a couple of refrigerator trucks moving into the area, presumably to take some of the bodies that have been found out. We also saw a long line of dumpster trucks, also to be able to bring some of the rubble that has been removed out of the area. We understand so far 3,000 tons of rubble have been removed from the area. New York Mayor Rudolph Giuliani earlier today telling reporters that so far 82 bodies have been found in the rubble. Only 16 of them have been identified. And of course, rescue workers also telling us that they mostly are finding body parts, and the number, of course, of casualties is expected to rise as the rescue operation continues. Mayor Rudolph Giuliani also asking the Federal Emergency Management Agency to bring 6,000 body bags. Meanwhile, the entire area south of 14th Street has been sealed off by the police. Several blocks in this area, lower Manhattan, remain without electricity. That is why the police earlier today has evacuated several citizens, especially the elderly. We also saw some people living on their own, but we also saw some people who chose to remain here in the area. One person telling us, look, I've lived in Manhattan all my life. Why would I leave just now? Back to you, Garrick.
Thank you very much. Alicia, a quick question there. We saw in some of those videotape scenes the workers, of course, working with face masks, almost gas masks, because of the smoke and the dust there that's in the air. What is it like there? Can you actually walk around without a mask? What does it smell like?
You can walk around without a mask, but there is still a lot of dust and there's still a lot of smoke that really you can feel if you spend there more than just a few minutes. You can still feel that it starts battering you. So certainly there is still a lot of hazardous gases coming out. There's still a lot of dust. And certainly for the rescue operation and for the rescue workers who are there, they have to wear protective gloves, protective gas masks. For the people who go there just in and out, just a regular mask or white mask, it's enough. But still, you can really feel that there is still a lot of dust, and it's really bothering people who spend there more than just 20 minutes or so.
Alessio Vinci, thank you very much. And we were just listening to your reply there, because that's the situation in lower Manhattan. And since the tragedy on Tuesday morning, the prevailing wind has been blowing the smoke out towards New York Harbor, out towards the Atlantic Ocean. But today, or yesterday, Wednesday, in New York, Eastern Time, there was a brief moment when the wind shifted. And I was at home, and my wife was there too, and we said, there's something strange in the air. And we looked out the window and sniffed. The wind had shifted briefly. And the smell of lower Manhattan, that smoke, was coming uptown to the center of the city, to Rockefeller Center, to Central Park, to Park Avenue, Fifth Avenue. And for Manhattanites who for so long, these last nearly 2 days now, have not seen personally or even smelled personally what's happening there in lower Manhattan, suddenly we got a whiff of it, you might say. Back to you now, Jim and Colleen.
All right, well, winds of change.
Garrick Utley, thanks very much. We want to go back now to the U.S. Capitol. President Bush, who likened Tuesday's attack to acts of war, saying those words, and a struggle of good versus evil as well.
Mr. Bush coming under more pressure to take action, and take action quickly, we might add. He's taking steps to do just that. John King is near the White House now, joining us live. John, the view from the White House, the sense this day.
Well, certainly, Jim, a sense of urgency. Relative calm in Washington tonight. And remember, we spoke at this time last night. There was a great deal more security in the streets of Washington last night than there is tonight. So from a security standpoint, things at least more peaceful and calm here in the Capitol. But as you mentioned, the president moving on several fronts here, being updated, we are told, constantly on the status of the investigation. Those briefings will continue in the morning as the president leads intensifying discussions throughout the upper levels of the administration, assessing the damage here, assessing the body count, unfortunately, and assessing what the United States should do now to respond.
The president got his first look at the devastation as planning for a possible military response intensified. The White House is asking Congress to pass a resolution authorizing the use of force to retaliate for the deadly terrorist attacks, and making a major diplomatic push seeking international support as well. Mr. Bush called the leaders of Britain, Canada, France, Germany, Russia, and China, and welcomed a NATO statement calling the attacks on the United States tantamount to a strike against the alliance.
We will rally the world. We will be patient, we'll be focused, and we will be steadfast in our determination. This battle will take time and resolve, but make no mistake about it, we will win.
Mr. Bush met twice with his national security team, and sources tell CNN the discussions included talk of potential military responses and an update on the fast-developing investigation. In the words of one senior official familiar with the evidence, quote, everything points to the terrorist network of Osama bin Laden.
This enemy hides in shadows and has no regard for human life. This is an enemy who preys on innocent and unsuspecting people, then runs for cover. But it won't be able to run for cover forever.
The Bush team also responded to questions about why it took the president so long to return to Washington after the attacks. The administration said it had credible and reliable information that the jet that barreled into the Pentagon was initially heading toward the White House. And it said there was reason to believe Air Force One also was a target. And that is why Mr. Bush stopped at 2 military bases on a 9-hour trip back to Washington from Florida and had fighter jet escorts on the final leg home.
The information that we had was real and credible about Air Force One. The manner in which Air Force One operated maintained the security of Air Force One at all times.
The president met with congressional leaders seeking quick agreement on an emergency spending bill.
Now negotiations on 2 fronts between the administration and Congress will resume at daybreak here in Washington, and we are told there is continuing progress on both fronts. The first set of talks aimed at getting to the president's desk perhaps as early as tomorrow afternoon, legislation authorizing $20 billion to pay for the initial cleanup, recovery, and rescue efforts, as well as the early stages of the investigation. The second track of those negotiations aimed at winning a resolution backing the use of military force by the president to retaliate for these terrorist strikes, that Mr. Bush equates to an act of war. Jim?
John King, we're hearing late word from Afghanistan that the Taliban is saying they haven't arrested, don't intend to arrest Osama bin Laden. Had the U.S. administration demanded that once again?
We are told that there have been back-channel conversations and that the State Department has made clear that they would like the Taliban to cooperate with turning over Mr. bin Laden, but we're also told there has been no progress on that front, so certainly that statement tonight consistent with word we're hearing in Washington that so far the administration has been quite upset, believing quite the contrary for what it hears from the Taliban. Yesterday, the Taliban saying it did not believe Mr. bin Laden could be responsible for this. This statement tonight, once again, reflecting the growing strain between the administration and the Taliban organization that it believes provides safe harbor to the bin Laden organization.
Well,
Jim?
John, I guess that's the point. I mean, is there any reason for the administration to think now that it would get any more cooperation from the Taliban than it ever has before?
Certainly, Colleen, no reason for the administration to be confident. One reason this administration is taking painstaking efforts to try to show international solidarity on this front is to try to show that it is not just the traditional U.S. allies, not just Great Britain, not just the European allies in the NATO alliance, but they're hoping to win stronger statements in the days ahead, not just from the UN Security Council, as we saw today, but from the Russians and the Chinese as well, trying to isolate anyone who might provide safe haven. But the administration also understands there will be a burden on it to prove that it has credible information as to who is responsible for these deadly attacks.
Understood. CNN's John King, thanks. Well, Secretary of State Colin Powell, also a key player in all of this. He's been busy working the phones, contacting world leaders, and building international support. He said the attacks were strikes not only against the United States, but also against humanity.
We're building a strong coalition to go after these perpetrators, but more broadly, to go after terrorism wherever we find it in the world. It's a scourge not only against the United States, but against civilization, and it must be brought to an end.
And meanwhile, a show of solidarity across the Atlantic. NATO held an emergency meeting in Brussels, and there, for the first time since NATO was formed, it pledged to give its broadest backing possible.
On September the 12th, the North Atlantic Council met again in response to the appalling attacks perpetrated yesterday against the United States of America. The Council agreed that if it is determined that this attack was directed from abroad against the United States, it shall be regarded as an action covered by Article 5 of the Washington Treaty, which states that an armed attack against one or more of the allies in Europe or in North America shall be considered an attack against them all.
Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, meantime, warning U.S. troops difficult times may be ahead. In a taped message, he said much more would be expected of American forces in the weeks and the months to come. The defense chief said he will face what he called terrible enemies in an entirely new kind of conflict.
We are, in a sense, seeing the definition of a new battlefield in the world, a 21st century battlefield. And it is a different kind of conflict. It is something that is not unique to this century, to be sure, but it is, given our geography and given our circumstance, it is, in a major sense, new for this country.
Secretary Rumsfeld was at the Pentagon when that attack happened. Emergency services say there is now little chance of finding any survivors in the rubble, but they're still searching for victims. That operation's still underway. For the latest, let's join Mark Potter, who is at the Pentagon. Are the rescue and search operations actually underway overnight at this time, Mark?
Yeah, as we speak, there are workers out there right now at the Pentagon, and as you said, they do not expect to find any survivors, and they have revised the death toll, the estimated death toll. They're guessing that around 200 people died here, including the 64 aboard the plane. That's down considerably from estimates earlier that went as high as 800. Now, early this morning, as we speak, we're looking at a live shot here. Workers and firefighters are still on the scene, sifting through the rubble, looking for victims, shoring up some of the structures. FBI agents have also been on scene looking for evidence for their criminal case. In effect, what we are looking at here is one big crime scene. Officials are also looking for the black boxes from the plane, the voice and data recorders, and they consider the discovery of those black boxes, whenever that occurs, to be extremely important because it may help answer questions about what happened here, and specifically whether the hijackers may have originally targeted the White House before turning the plane toward the Pentagon, as has been suggested. Now, we do have a graphic, if we can show that shows the area of the Pentagon that was affected by the attack and by the very, very intense fire afterward. You can see that about half the building here is shut down. It's sealed off. The corridors are blocked by armed guards. The Pentagon, however, despite this, says that it expects to be fully operational later this morning, although, as you can imagine, people are going to have to be doubling up in offices because so much of the building, as we can see here, has been cordoned off. Earlier today, and you can see it here, that flag was unfurled by workers. That occurred during the time that the president was here. And as for what the U.S. military is doing right now, aircraft and warships are in a defensive position along the east and west coasts of the United States, also in Hawaii. And the military is still in full control of all U.S. airspace, but is preparing to hand that back to the FAA perhaps later today. Back to you.
All right, CNN's Mark Potter at the Pentagon. Thanks very much.
U.S. intelligence agencies are working their contacts all around the globe, north to Canada and oceans away in the Middle East. This as the scene continues in Lower Manhattan, the painstaking search there for minute details, for any survivors, for, as we have noted earlier, the victims of Tuesday's tragedy.
And you can see in this live picture we're showing you right now from New York, there's still a lot of steam, a lot of smoke in that area where the search and rescue operation is going on at this time. Pretty tricky down there, Jim, pretty dangerous still. Some buildings surrounding that area have been damaged as well. There's concern about those buildings and how stable they are, too.
Well, as all of that's going on, we said there's a global search underway. Information, anything that they can glean. The FBI has had some early success in its probe of Tuesday's four-pronged attack. Agents have turned up names and physical evidence in several domestic locations. Chillingly, it appears that several of the hijackers who seized the controls of those doomed aircraft may have received pilot training on U.S. soil, and we get more on that story from Mike Betcher.
From Maine to Florida, the investigation moved quickly along the eastern seaboard.
We have, in the last 24 hours, taken the manifests and used those as an evidentiary base, and have talked to many of the families of the victims, and have successfully, I believe, identified many of the hijackers on each of the 4 flights that went down.
Federal investigators now believe they know the identity of 4 men capable of piloting the 2 planes that left Boston and crashed into the World Trade Center. The key, rental cars parked by the suspected terrorist at Portland International Airport and Boston's Logan Airport, each yielding clues that ultimately led investigators to flight schools in Florida.
A number of the suspected hijackers were trained as pilots in the United States.
Rental records for the car left in Portland brought investigators to residences in Vero Beach, Florida, which were searched by the FBI. Inside one house, pictures of Adnan Bukhari and a pilot certificate from a Florida flight school in his name. Also found inside the residence, another pilot certificate for Amir Abbas Bukhari. Another certificate indicates that at least one of the Bukharis participated in a program to help train Saudi Airlines employees. Federal investigators believe the 2 men are brothers and prime suspects. FBI agents also visited other Florida locations after gathering clues from the second rental car parked at Boston's Logan Airport that led to the identity of 2 more men, also pilots, Mohammed Atta and Marwan Youssef Al-Shehi, who received at least some flight training at Huffman Aviation in Venice, Florida. Charles Voss is a bookkeeper at Huffman Aviation who briefly allowed the 2 men to stay at his house.
They were, like I said, students, and they arrived over there a year ago. It was in last July. And when they first arrived, they had no place to stay. They just popped in pretty much, as I recall, unannounced. And so we provided them, for the benefit of the flight school, provided them a place to stay for a few days.
At least one person believed to be an acquaintance of the Bukharis has been taken into custody for questioning.
There have been occasions where we have interviewed individuals and come to find that the individual is out of status and that individual has been detained on an immigration hold. But there have been no arrests relating to these hijackings at this point.
Having found the 4 men, federal investigators believe piloted the 2 hijacked jets into the World Trade Center towers. They are now scouring Florida flight schools, searching for the pilots of the other 2 jetliners, one that crashed in Pennsylvania, the other that rammed the Pentagon. Mike Betcher, CNN, Atlanta.
The Justice Department's Office of Victims of a Crime has set up a hotline there for tips that could help prevent a terrorist act. You can call 1-800-483-5137. Families and relatives of those that have been missing since these attacks, here's a number that you can call, 1-800-331-0075.
Well, and Jim, you know that a call went out for people to donate blood because of the number of casualties in this. Well, U.S. medical officials now say that the voluntary donations have been so massive that they've provided enough blood for the victims of the attacks. But blood can be kept and stored for no more than 42 days, so more may be needed in about 2 to 8 weeks from now, so keep that in mind. Donors, especially those with type O and Rh negative blood, which emergency workers still say that they do need, should call 1-888-HELP-NOW. Well, one of the hijacked planes is providing investigators with clues about what exactly happened on board. CNN has obtained a partial transcript of what air traffic controllers heard taking place in the cockpit of United Airlines Flight 93. That is the plane that crashed in rural Pennsylvania. Shouting is heard in that cockpit while United Airlines Flight 93 is over the Cleveland area. Someone yells, "Get out of here." The microphone is turned off, then it's switched back on. Some scuffling is heard. Again, a voice yells, "Get out of here." The microphone's again turned off. The pilot, Captain Jason Dahl, is not heard from again. And then when the microphone is turned back on, someone is heard speaking English with what is described as an Arabic accent. He tells the 38 passengers, quote, "There is a bomb on board. This is the captain speaking. Remain in your seat. There is a bomb on board. Stay quiet. We are meeting their demands. We are returning to the airport." The microphone then goes off, and that plane crashes shortly after in that field in rural Pennsylvania. Well, it is thought that Flight 93 was destined for a well-known target in the Washington area. That plan may have actually been thwarted by the passengers. Another thing we do know, one of the passengers called his mother from a mobile phone. He said that the male passengers had voted to try to overwhelm the hijackers once they figured out what was going on. Some say that that struggle may have caused the plane's mysterious crash in that field. Jim.
And they found a black box on that aircraft, and they're going to be getting more and more information from all of this that will be coming in. We'll continue to follow that. But right now, let's go back, get a little bit of a closer look at how New York City is coping with these sweeping attacks. We return to Garrick Utley. He's right there in Manhattan. Garrick.
Yes, Jim, and once again, not just people here in New York, but across the nation, because we want to take just a moment and raise a question, which is going to be very important for the United States in the weeks and months to come. How are Americans going to react to these terrorist attacks? Is it going to be sort of a broad stroke? As somebody said a moment ago in one of those reports, why don't we just go out and nuke them? I'm so angry, I'm so bitter, we've got to have action. Or we'll be more disciplined and focused and really be patient and wait until the administration feels it has fingered who caused these attacks in Virginia and here in New York City. And one example of how that may or may not go occurred in Washington Square this evening. We were there about half an hour ago, and our correspondent Jody Ross is there once again. And one of the things you mentioned, Jody, is that you did not detect bitterness there. You detected great emotion, but not anger. Why?
It's true, Garrick. It's a peaceful group here tonight. They've come together to sort of sing, grieve together, mourn together. They're hoping for a peaceful retaliation to all of this. They're not looking for violence. They think now is a time for prayer, for discussion, for healing. A couple of hours ago, there were hundreds of people gathered here, again, comforting each other, hugging each other, sharing their pain.
So proudly we hailed as the twilight's last gleaming, whose light was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave?
Well, like everyone else, I'm really, it's a terrible thing that's happened, and I think it's better if we all get together.
It still doesn't seem real. It can't be. This doesn't happen in New York. This doesn't happen in the United States.
There was chanting along with the singing tonight. We heard renditions of Amazing Grace and Blowing in the Wind, We Shall Overcome, and Give Peace a Chance. At one point, the group together sang the national anthem and then cheered. Again, a peaceful feeling here, a somber one, but a non-violent one. These people want a peaceful resolution. They've said they've had enough violence for the time being and are now hoping that things can sort of calmly resolve themselves. This group of people also said that they will sit through the night, at least the people that are here continue to sit through the night, burn candles, talk to each other, comfort each other. We've still seen people arriving. The longer we stay, the more that people do come. And one interesting thing about being here tonight is the smell in the air. You know, all night we've been unable to escape that pungent and bitter smell of smoke. But here with these scented candles burning, it's actually a relief from all of that, a sort of mini oasis, I've been saying, in the middle of chaos and destruction. A really nice change from the way things have been. Maybe this is maybe this attitude here, this feeling here, can come on strong, overpower what's going on in the city right now. At least that's what the people here hope. Garrick, back to you.
Jody Ross, thank you very much. Perhaps, maybe, or perhaps maybe not. Many government officials are very keenly aware, particularly in such a multi-ethnic city as New York City, of the ramifications of hate, anger, and bitterness. Certainly Arab Americans in this country, because so many of the suspicions are pointed towards Arabs or Muslims as those behind these attacks, are very much on guard. This afternoon, when I was coming into work, I spoke with, it was a taxi driver, born in Egypt, lived here 25 years, American citizen, proud, loyal, red, white, and blue American. He said, this is home. And yet he said, as an Arab American, I know these are going to be very, very tough times to come. Colleen, back to you.
Eric, thanks. Well, images from other parts of the world do show a starkly different reaction from that. Unfortunately, a reaction that may indeed fuel hatred. Some Palestinians have openly rejoiced over news of the strikes at the symbols of American military and financial might. Other Arabs said that the terror was triggered by what they called misguided U.S. policy in the Middle East. We want to take a little bit of a look at this now. Ben Wiedemann is going to explain for us where this anger flows from.
A group of Palestinians celebrate at the news of the attacks in New York and Washington. Other Palestinians, including those who held a vigil outside the U.S. consulate in Jerusalem, say such sentiments do not represent the majority. But few in the region deny they share a growing sense of anger and frustration with U.S. policy in the Middle East, where, over the years, the U.S. has managed to gain the bitter enmity of millions. For decades, Arabs have been critical of America's substantial diplomatic, economic, and military support for Israel, while many believe the U.S. has turned a blind eye to Palestinian demands that Israel leave Arab land.
You know, the anti-American feeling is very high now in the Middle East and the Muslim world because what's happening on the occupied territories, and many people accuse the United States of actually helping the Israeli and protecting them.
Since the outbreak of the Palestinian uprising nearly a year ago, anger at the United States has increased dramatically. Alarmed at growing anti-American sentiment, traditional U.S. allies in the region, including Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak, have warned that American interests are at risk if the U.S. doesn't modify its Mideast policy. Another source of bitterness, Iraq. For more than a decade, Washington has insisted upon maintaining harsh United Nations economic sanctions, officially intended to target the regime of Iraqi President Saddam Hussein. Yet many blame the sanctions for causing the deaths of hundreds of thousands of ordinary Iraqis from disease and malnutrition. Elsewhere, Washington has been the most vocal advocate of economic and political sanctions against Libya, Sudan, Iran, and Afghanistan, all predominantly Muslim countries. The day the Muslim countries unite, says this Pakistani, Russia and the U.S. will flow away like a gust of water. You can't blame Palestine or anyone else. It's a natural destruction. You've asked for it. Responsibility for Tuesday's massive terror attack has yet to be determined, but few in the Mideast doubt the depth of anger and hatred toward the United States. Ben Wiedemann, CNN.
Now, the current conflict in the Middle East began nearly a year ago, and the perceived U.S. support of Israel has angered many people, as you just heard. And for more perspective on all of this, we're going to be joined now by Hisham Melhem. He's the Washington bureau chief of Asafir. That's a leading Lebanese daily. Let me begin by asking you, obviously, the Arab community is concerned about what retribution it may face, undeservedly in the weeks or months ahead. But at the same time, how ready is the Arab American community that is uniquely positioned in order to help in this investigation? How ready are they to pitch in?
As you well know, Jim, the Arab American organizations and a number of Muslim American organizations issued strong denunciations yesterday. They expressed their solidarity, of course, with their American compatriots. They urged their constituencies to donate blood. And they said that they are more than willing to help the authorities in finding the perpetrators and punishing them. The leaders of the communities were swift in their denunciations. They were quick in expressing their views. And obviously they were cognizant of what happened following Oklahoma City, when many in the Arab American community, and many of the Arab Americans, by the way, are third and fourth generation Americans, were subjected to harassment and verbal assaults and attacks. Muslim centers, mosques, and other headquarters of Arab American organizations were also subjected to these kinds of attacks. So they are very conscious of what could happen to them, and they are very. There is a sense of trepidation, so to speak, in those communities because of the potential for loss of life, for deepening divisions between the rest of the United States and these old communities, in fact.
All right. Hisham Malham, I want to tap your knowledge of the Middle East and the ongoing investigation. It's been years long into Osama bin Laden and all of these things, and talk a little bit about that man just in terms of his goals. I mean, overall, his main objective is Saudi Arabia, but many people say that he really wants to ignite a global war between Islam and the rest of the world.
Look, this is a man who believes in atavistic principles. This is a man who left a trail of blood in Afghanistan. This is a man who is waging, I wouldn't say a holy war, I would just a barbaric war on his own people. He wrapped himself in a Muslim garb, but whatever he has done, whether in Afghanistan or whether against the Saudis or whether against the Americans, has nothing to do with Islam. In fact, his own country denounced him. He has no real support in the Arab world. He is benefiting, unfortunately, from that deep sense of grievance that exists in the region, in the Arab world, because of the ongoing Palestinian plight, and because of what most Arabs, in fact, and most Muslims see as strong American unqualified support for Israel. He's benefited also from the ongoing tragedy in Iraq, and unfortunately he had enough funds and he has the support that the Taliban government would share Osama bin Laden's distorted, barbaric view of the rest of the world, if you will. And he's been waging a war not only against the West, he's waging war against his own people, against the religion that he claims he's defending.
Hisham Malham, the U.S. president said he wants to build up a broad-based coalition, one that would include Islamic countries, one that would include Arab countries. What do you think the likelihood of that is?
Obviously, you cannot find this kind of terror by military means alone. Of course, you cannot fight it also alone without the collaboration and the support, or at least the tacit understanding of some of those key states in the region. Look, the Saudi government, the Egyptian government, the Jordanian governments, these are governments that are very close to the United States. They suffered from this kind of terror in the past. Their regimes are under tremendous pressure from their own people because of this frustration over the American inaction or the lack of resolve in putting an end to the ongoing tragedy of Palestine. But I think if the American authorities could come up with credible evidence pointing to bin Laden as the responsible, the party responsible for these heinous crimes in New York and in Washington, and if the United States embark on some sort of a military retribution or act against bin Laden or the Taliban government, and there were no collateral casualties, quote unquote, I think there will be a great deal of understanding in the Arab world. That doesn't mean that there are some people in the region who may sympathize with Osama bin Laden because they believe in this kind of war among civilizations, but I would argue that this is a tiny minority, and I would argue that this tiny minority has no solution to the problems that are besetting the region.
All right, Hisham Malham, we're going to have to leave it right there. Vasafir, our thanks to you for being with us, as always, Hisham. Colleen?
All right, thank you, Jim. We do have some updated information just coming in right now from CNN's Justice Department correspondent Kelly Arena, so we want to bring that to you right now. The FBI is saying it's working on the assumption that there were between 12 and 24 hijackers involved in these attacks. Law enforcement sources telling CNN that there may be as many as 50 people. That's maybe as many as 50 people involved in the planning and the execution of the attacks. These would be people who could be associates, for example. So law enforcement sources saying there could be maybe as many as 50 people involved totally. The FBI also saying that it now has as many as 2,000 leads that it is working. We saw some of this coming to fruition today with some people taken in for questioning, some cars impounded, apparently some evidence found. We heard FBI Director Robert Mueller say today that investigators have actually identified many of the hijackers. So we're keeping you up to date on all of that now. Well, New Yorkers like to think of their city as It's really the heartbeat of the world, a center of culture, music, finance, but it's also home to the United Nations, as you know. But following the attacks, the UN Security Council decided to postpone next week's World Summit for Children. A UN resolution also condemned the attacks, saying that the Security Council calls on all states to work together urgently to bring justice to the perpetrators, organizers, and sponsors of the terrorist attacks. The Security Council calls also on the international community to redouble their efforts to prevent and suppress terrorist attacks by increased cooperation. Jim?
United Nations aid workers began leaving Kabul, Afghanistan on Wednesday. The UN ordered all of its workers out of Afghanistan after the attacks in New York and Washington. The UN says the move was taken out of concern for the safety of its workers in 6 Afghan cities. A UN spokeswoman declined to say whether the organization was worried about being caught in the middle of a possible U.S. military operation in Afghanistan. Osama bin Laden, of course a key suspect in these attacks, is based in Afghanistan. There was a moment of silence this day in Europe.
Call upon you to respect a minute's silence in memory of all the victims.
The silence, another sign of the far-reaching impact of Tuesday's tragic events in New York and Washington as the European Parliament remembered the victims. In a further mark of respect, Friday, September 14th is now declared a day of mourning throughout the 15-nation European bloc. All the Europeans are going to be asked to observe a 3-minute silence. At the end of a special session, the European Parliament also pledged to support the United States in its search for those who are responsible for the attack on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon.
Well, we have been seeing support for the United States government flowing in from halls of leadership worldwide. And on the distant streets of distant lands, regular citizens are watching and also mourning for the American people.
I can only say that all those who have lost their lives, and indeed those who are related and have loved ones who have lost their lives, are very much in my thoughts and prayers.
I react to the families hearing the news, how their lives are never going to be the same. And I feel their pain. I saw that building collapse and I broke down in tears. I was just sobbing because this is pain. This is human suffering.
We are here to lay some wreaths, some flowers, and to also show our sympathy in action so that the American people understand the Palestinians are not their enemy.
On behalf of the citizens of Belfast, I would like to extend our deepest condolences to the people of the United States of America following the terrible atrocity.
My heartfelt sympathy is with the American people subjected to inhuman terrorist attacks which have taken the lives of thousands of innocent human beings and caused unspeakable sorrow in the hearts of all men and women.
Well, now to some, I guess it goes in the unfortunate category of news I wish we didn't have to report. But U.S. officials are vowing to crack down on some gas stations that have more than doubled their prices in the past 2 days. In Ohio, some stations were selling gasoline at $4 a gallon. Panic buying there led to drastic measures. The mayor in one city shut down the city's 9 gas stations. In Kansas, the hike was even higher. One station was reportedly charging more than $5.50 a gallon. Our European viewers, I hope they're not watching this. That's just about the regular price. The American Automobile Association says such hikes are unfairly exploiting the current situation.
It is the kind of exploitation no one likes to see. We're told, though, very isolated incidents. Well, U.S. stock markets are not going to reopen before Friday. Bond trading, though, is scheduled to resume on Thursday.
Meantime, stocks are trading in Asia at this hour, and Maggie Lake is standing by live in our New York bureau. She has all the numbers for us. Maggie.
Hey, Maggie.
Jim, for global financial markets, the focus is now on Asia. We're looking to see whether the markets there can stabilize. They took quite a hit on Wednesday. So far, they seem to have found their feet, helped in part by gains during the European session. If we take a look, Tokyo's Nikkei is trading up over 0.5%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index is up over 1.5%. Only Singapore Straits Times lags behind, but it is only down marginally. So it's much better news there today. Now, as you mentioned, the U.S. stock markets will be closed on Thursday, but bond markets will resume regular trading at 8 a.m. Thursday. The Chicago Board of Trade and Chicago Mercantile Exchange, the country's 2 largest futures markets, said interest rate, foreign exchange, and commodity products would resume trade. Now, ideally, analysts would like to see all of the markets open together, but there is a feeling that some trade is better than none.
The bond market functions more appropriately and best when the stock market and the bond market are trading together. But we can certainly trade bonds without stocks for 24 to 48 hours.
And that's what they'll have to do. Now, there is an expectation that there will be a flight to quality into government bonds, the reliable government bonds, amid all of the uncertainty. But there are some questions about access and liquidity. Cantor Fitzgerald, the #1 market maker in bonds, was headquartered in the World Trade Center. From all reports we have so far, it seems they may have suffered substantial losses. Of their 1,000 employees, roughly 200 were accounted for. Now, we want to stress these are incomplete numbers, but the indications are very grim. As one trader put it, the bond market is in mourning. Cantor officials in Tokyo have said its electronic systems are completely intact. They have a data recovery system, but they say, quote, the people are irreplaceable. And that is a sentiment that is shared here on Wall Street. Well, let's go over to Richard Quest now in London for the latest in Europe. Richard?
Indeed, Maggie. David Buick of Cantor Fitzgerald will be joining us in the next hour to give us his reaction from the London point of view. He says also that our only real interest is at the families and our staff in New York. Everyone holds them very dear. European markets, after initially reacting sharply to the attack in New York, spent most of Wednesday quietly pondering what to do next. Trading volumes were much lower than usual. In some cases, they were reduced by half. No one wanted to be distracted from the events on the other side of the Atlantic. For investment banks in London, there was the awful reality that their colleagues in New York were directly involved, and perhaps some had been killed. Some companies have set up counselling for distressed employees.
A company has a profile, it functions a certain way, it has certain styles. And that is now going to be very, very confused. It almost will have to be reinvented. And they're not used to this. They're actually not used to dealing with a huge psychological impact. So they'll find it quite difficult. And I suspect they'll need a lot of help.
Now to events on Thursday. Officials at the European Central Bank will meet in Frankfurt to decide what more it can do to limit the global economic impact of the attack. There have been calls for European countries to cut interest rates to help stabilise the global economy. But when asked directly, the ECB President Wim Duisenberg said that was unlikely.
I think a quick move, as implied in your questions, would rather have inspired a reaction of panic than of stability and calmness.
On Wednesday, the world's central banks added more than $100 billion to the global financial system. In a coordinated move, the Bank of Japan, the European Central Bank, and the US Federal Reserve increased the supply of cash available. The infusion is designed to ensure that banks don't run short of money in the next few days. There are fears that the so-called credit crunch, with companies needing extra cash to tide them over during the difficult period. A quick look at what we're expecting from a European Open in just around 90 minutes' time. The FTSE and the DAX in Frankfurt are both expected to be just off a tad, down around 2 to 5 points, with the tech mark also up around about 5 points. That's the way the financial world looks from London. Colleen.
All right, Richard Quest, thank you very much. Well, information keeps pouring in on all aspects of this tragedy, including information law enforcement sources telling CNN maybe as many as 50 people involved in this whole attack. There's also been quite a bit of information on what was going on inside those hijacked planes.
And as we were telling everyone earlier, CNN did obtain a partial transcript of the cockpit comments that were heard from United Flight 93, but we're still piecing together what really happened at the controls of that, as well as, of course, the other 3 flights. Miles O'Brien wraps up that story.
Nothing seemed amiss when American Airlines Flight 11 left the runway in Boston Tuesday morning. The 767-200 was about half full, toting 81 passengers, a cockpit crew of 2, and 9 flight attendants to the opposite coast. The captain likely planned for a 5-hour flight, so there was roughly 8,500 gallons of jet fuel in its 3 tanks. FAA radars tracked the airliner as it followed the flight plan. But then, about 20 minutes into the flight, somewhere over upstate New York, it turned sharply to the south. Flight 11 was hijacked, apparently by knife-wielding men. Airline pilots are trained to handle such situations by keeping calm, complying with requests, and, if possible, dialing in an emergency 4-digit code on a device called a transponder. It transmits crucial flight data to air traffic controllers. The action takes seconds, but it appears no such code was entered. But in the cabin, a frantic flight attendant managed to use a phone to call American Airlines Command Center in Dallas. She reported the trouble. A pilot apparently keyed the microphone, transmitting a cockpit conversation. The hijackers could be heard saying, "We have more planes, we have more planes." Radio transmissions like this would have been recorded on the ground by the FAA.
The police have identified 5 suspects that they believe were involved with this terrorist act, and 2 of whom may be brothers, apparently, reportedly. 2 of whom, 2 others, may have flown in from Portland and originated in Canada.
About 5 minutes before Flight 11 started heading south, another 767, United Flight 175, left Boston, also for Los Angeles, 65 souls aboard. 15 minutes after becoming airborne, it veered off course. One passenger made 2 calls to his father. In one exchange, he said a flight attendant was stabbed. In the second call, he told his dad the plane was going down.
They knew not to carry guns on the airplane. If they fired off a bullet, they could have had explosive decompression on the aircraft. They knew what they were doing, and they knew what their mission was, obviously.
We know what happened next. The 767 struck and ultimately leveled the World Trade Center's Twin Towers.
I know pilots. No, if you're going to die, you're not going to fly in a World Trade Center to do it. Yeah, there would be a struggle, major struggle.
By 8:20, the 3rd hijacked flight, American Flight 77, a 757, left Dulles Airport outside Washington, again bound for Los Angeles with 66 people on board. Radar tracking information on this flight obtained by CNN seems to indicate the transponder was turned off, which would have made it tougher to see on radar. We do know this. An hour and 20 minutes after departure, it plowed into the Pentagon. On board was Barbara Olson, a well-known attorney and frequent CNN legal commentator. Huddled in the back of the plane, Olson called her husband twice from her cell phone. She described the frantic scene.
She said that they were armed with knives and box cutters, cardboard cutters.
Even as the focus shifted to the nation's capital, a 4th plane, United Airlines Flight 93, bound for San Francisco out of Newark, takes a sudden 180-degree turn near Cleveland. More than one of the 38 passengers called their families to offer final goodbyes.
He said, I want you to know I love you very much, and I'm calling you from the plane. We've been taken over. There are 3 men that say they have a bomb, and then the phone went dead.
The 757 began homing in on the Washington area, its target unknown. But this flight did not make it that far, and this may be a clue why. One passenger, 31-year-old Jeremy Glick, called home from the doomed plane. He said the passengers were herded to the rear of the plane by a trio of hijackers armed with knives and a red box they say contained a bomb. When Glick's family confirmed what another passenger heard, that a plane had already struck the World Trade Center, Glick dropped the phone, then returned to tell his family the male passengers had taken a vote to attack the hijackers. Not long thereafter, Flight 93 crashed into a cornfield in Somerset County, Pennsylvania. Pilots assessing this horrific sequence of events to a person believe the hijackers were in control of the 3 planes that hit their targets and that they must have been well schooled in aviation.
No, these people were well qualified on the airplane. They knew the systems, they knew the navigation, and they knew the flight management system, the computers, and they knew navigation. I mean, they went from Boston and right down to New York. I mean, they had to know which way to turn.
Miles O'Brien, CNN.
Well, that a look at the investigation, the probe of what actually happened. And as we round out this hour, we're going to return to New York City, where efforts to find the survivors go on despite the darkness.
Rescuers with dogs still digging through all of that rubble there as New Yorkers rally in grief, defiance, and solidarity as well. Garrick Utley, one more time, joins us again for the very latest from there. Garrick?
Yes, Colleen and Jim, one of the themes that's been going through our reporting here and elsewhere on CNN these past nearly 2 days now is how people, individuals and groups cope with the disaster. This evening we saw in Washington Square over here in Greenwich Village of Manhattan the candlelight vigil. But other symbols of how people cope are also to be seen. One of the more interesting ones, and we really haven't seen this yet, occurs at least during daylight hours on the West Side Highway, which runs along the Hudson River here. It's the main artery in which the rescue teams come in and out. And what's happened is the growth of what you might call a spontaneous cheerleading team. Here's a report from our Jeannie Mose.
We've seen the bad news over and over, from above, from below.
I hope I live. It's coming down on me.
The doctor holding this camera did live, and now New Yorkers are saying we will survive. Guys driving bulldozers are getting the red carpet treatment.
Thank you!
New Yorkers, who sometimes treat camouflage as a fashion statement, are cheering the military.
Thank you, guys!
I was so touched when I first came around the corner and saw what was happening. I kept having to fight back tears.
I've been mesmerized by watching this on TV, and I wanted to come out and show my support.
This woman used to have a view of the Twin Towers from her apartment. Now the skyline has too much sky.
It reminds me of when somebody loses their 2 front teeth or something, and there's this void, and you feel like something should be there, but it's not.
I woke up this morning and I made this t-shirt, and I thought, that's just not enough. What else can I do?
Luke Littell ended up making a big thank you sign. Soon others joined in. Firemen tend to be favorites. But folks even cheered Con Ed, a utility.
Probably the only time that we'll ever see Con Ed trucks applauded.
The crowd applauded trucks full of debris and ash.
You see these flowers?
Yep.
That's for every truck that goes by that has ashes in it, because in those ashes is someone's family's family.
Some folks choked back tears. Others vented their anger.
I'm mad. That's what I am. I'm a Vietnam veteran. Mr. Bush, put the bombers up in the air. Get him. Just get him. Get him. Get him. Get him.
Some would like to get the towers rebuilt.
You can hurt us, you can keep us down, but you can't keep us down forever. And I think the rebuild would be a symbol to the world that the human spirit is alive and well here.
The spirits of those involved in the rescue effort seemed raised by the reception.
I think the people are great!
A moving reception for those who move the earth. Jeannie Mose, CNN, New York.
And they will be moving it, certainly, for many months to come. Jim and Colleen, back to you.
Garrick Utley, thanks very much. Well, it is time for Jonathan Mann and Relisa Vasileva to step in and continue our coverage.
We're going to leave you now with some pictures of the all too familiar scene, the horrific scene that was Tuesday, September the 11th.
Stay with us.
Holy shit! Holy shit!